Hello, and welcome to my oral presentation. This forms part of the first module, Positions of Practice, on the Master's Degree course at Falmouth University. My name is Carl Thomas, and my objective here is to present an overview of the historical, current and future photography practice. Photography has been part of my life for many years, and as you can see, it started with me as a subject in these images from the 1960s. I'm intrigued that despite the 50-year gap between those images and today, some of those memories are absolutely like they were last week. The picture, for example, of my brother and I under the Christmas tree with the train set feels like it was only yesterday. In Sontag's On Photography, she remarks that according to sociological study, households with children are twice as likely to have a camera when compared to households with none. She further remarks that not to take pictures of one's children, particularly when they are small, is a sign of parental indifference, just as not turning up for one's graduation picture is a gesture of adolescent rebellion. My parents are certainly not indifferent. My father was away quite a lot because he was in the Navy, but nevertheless there are boxes and boxes of hundreds, possibly thousands of photographs in my parents' loft space, and at some point I intend to arrange to look through them all, as I'm already looking at images in a completely new way since starting the Master's Degree course, and so may discover new and perhaps fresh perspectives on what I perceive as existing memories. A very, very exciting project indeed. As I grew older, watching my parents taking photographs inspired me to pick up the camera whenever my mum or dad would let me. I started taking pictures of my family and grandparents when we had family get-togethers. We were a very close family, so this was fairly often. It wasn't long before I started using my own, albeit fairly basic camera. I think my first camera was one of those 110 format cameras that took a very small odd cartridge type film and used single-use flash bulbs. I was always keen to experiment, and I recall borrowing someone's Polaroid camera. I was fascinated with the almost instantaneous nature of the image production, despite its very poor quality. I think, however, I stopped using one because the film was very expensive. For many years, I continued asking to take photos whenever anyone produced a camera, eventually being given a used Praktica MTL, I think it was an MTL3, slightly damaged camera. It worked, but it had a few marks on it, to say the least. And what it did teach me, though, of course, is the fact that that was a manual camera, so I had to understand light, manage exposure, and the exposure triangle. But then, around 1980, this happened. A very exciting advert was on the TV and in the various magazines to do with photography, the Pentax ME Super. I was hooked. I saved obsessively for what seemed like years in order to buy this camera, and I remember the day vividly I finally got it. I owned a proper camera. I immediately set about experimenting, taking pictures of anything near me. I remember taking this image of me in the mirror with my new camera. I was so very proud of it. I experimented relentlessly, taking photographs of anything in the house I could get close to or near. So here we have the elements of our fire in the lounge, the light bulb in the bedroom, my little bedroom, the bottle of aftershave, Old Spice. I can still smell that stuff from looking at that image in the bathroom. The little watch, I used to have a collection of watches, so kind of a macro shot, trying to experiment with the sharpness of the lens. But looking back, it does remind me of the lack of immediacy when it comes to image creation. When you compare it to today's world, digital images are displayed immediately on the back of a camera, and there was something quite magical about the wait to see how an image would turn out once developed. Indeed, the filmmaker and photographer Win Wenders remarked that today's forensic way of working in the field diminishes opportunities to engage others in conversation, to hang out and reflect on what is happening without thinking of the next photograph. He argues that this is also the result of working digitally. I want to listen to the place, he said. I want to immerse myself in it. If I could look at the picture on the screen or the back of the camera, the dialogue would be over, he said. I find myself agreeing with this sentiment. The all too common practice of looking at the back of the camera, known as chimping, does remove one's attention from the subject and the scenario that you're in, even if it's only momentarily. One could say rather like checking one's emails on a smartphone whilst at dinner with friends. It's not considered polite and definitely removes you from the moment when that's occurring. I went on to photograph more typical subjects, such as nature, flowers, and landscapes. This one in Dorset is the famous Goat Hill. Most people think that's in Yorkshire, but it's actually in Dorset. And then my dogs, or my parents' dogs. So more of that later. But then the 80s happened, and I set about going away, and not going away, but a career. One had to earn a living, so I ended up working for various different companies. And what that did is, over that period of time, it took me away from photography because I didn't have time. And until eventually I started working for myself, and you can see the cash machine business there. It was my own company that we set up. And one of the valuable things I gained from working for myself and owning my own businesses was that valuable asset called time. One of the benefits of running your own business. So I found myself picking up the camera again at last. I was an amateur still, and I took a range of images, as you can see, that probably would represent a typical selection of the classic amateur photographer. And in fact, Sontag remarks in On Photography, in photography's early decades, photographs were expected to be idealized images. This is still the aim of the amateur photographer, for whom a beautiful photograph is photography of something beautiful, like a woman or a sunset. Whilst I'm proud of these images, they are, as Sontag remarks, beautiful images of beautiful things. They may be technically and compositionally very good images, but in my view, that's all they are. In 2015, I decided to set up a professional photography business alongside our existing businesses. So, Carl Thomas Photography was born. Initially with more of a cottage industry approach, to be honest, so if anybody paid for work, that would be a bonus, and I certainly did not have high expectations at the outset. The business would concentrate on dogs, the inspiration from photographing my parents' dogs and having dogs myself playing a significant role in the direction of my photography and the business. Sontag said, in regarding the pain of others, no sophisticated sense of what photography is or can be will ever weaken the satisfactions of a picture of an unexpected event seized mid-action by an alert photographer. Well, I capitalised on this and rapidly developed a client base that would commission me to capture those magical moments of their beloved dogs. The business today has over 23,000 followers on Facebook and is growing rapidly, covering private commissions as well as training on a one-to-one basis and workshops. So, turning to the future, where does that take me? Well, one of the things that fascinates me, having worked with hundreds of dogs and their owners, is the bond or connection that exists. I've captured that on one level for clients, as you can see these images, and they're not deep, meaningful images, but there is some kind of bond going on here, and it's started to gather my interest. I'm looking to delve much deeper into the relationship here with dogs on a much wider scale, and in particular what dogs can do for us beyond the classic man's best friend scenario. For example, a recent study by Lincoln University was able to include a number of things, but a few examples. Pet owners have a significantly lower blood pressure, plasma triglycerides, which effectively are fat cells, and cholesterol. Pet ownership has been associated with improved one-year survival rates for heart attacks. Non-pet owners are twice as likely to frequently feel lonely compared to pet owners. Pet owners report better happiness and health compared to non-pet owners. Medical detection dogs, for example, are able to use the amazing powers of smell to detect human diseases. Because these dogs can detect tiny odour concentrations around 1 part per trillion, which in context equates to a teaspoon, just think about that for a moment, a teaspoon of sugar in 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, they are potentially able to detect diseases such as cancer earlier than is currently possible. Absolutely fascinating. There are a range, I suppose, of what one would call disciplines or categories that dogs operate in. Well-known ones like guide dogs and hearing dogs for deaf people. Less well-known ones like PTSD dogs or medical detection dogs. These are dogs that are trained to sniff out explosives or sniff out drugs, find money or weapons. There are even dogs that work in the military that are trained to jump out of aeroplanes with parachutes on to land behind enemy lines to deal with and sniff out landmines. Homeless people often have dogs who provide some form of grounding and non-judgmental companionship. I plan to research these areas further over the coming modules, and in particular I'll be looking to connect with individuals who have benefited from these kind of dogs and hope to capture their story the challenges they have faced and the environment that they are currently in, and how dogs fit into their lives. I'm very much looking forward to this, and will be looking to try and capture the individuals in relation to not so much the photograph of the dog, but the actual individuals in their lives and what's their environment like, where do they live, how has it changed their lives. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening.